Yes. Super excited. We are all pumped to have James Renner here today.
We have author James Renner on.
I am going to take a deep dive into the suspects that James Renner has zeroed in on.
James Renner once again drops a bombshell.
Investigative journalist, reporter James Renner, who's been on the podcast, longtime friend of mine.
By a local writer, James Renner.
L'auteur et blogueur James Renner, bien connu.
All right, now please, go bananas for your host, James Renner.
Congratulations, true crime addicts. We've survived another week. It is Friday, October 14th, 2022. And there's so much going on this week. I'm glad you tuned in. So many true crime stories. And normally what I do is I read them all from around the world. You're welcome. It's me, James Renner, for you. But this week, and I whittled them down into like the top 3 stories. I could not do that this week. There's too much going on in true crime. Lots of trials started this week. So at the top, we're going to like rapid fire through 5 cases. And you're going to want to stay around after the break for cold case updates like Leah Croucher. Tons of stuff going on. So anyways, this rapid fire round, here we go. Up first, a civil suit is underway in New York City between actor Anthony Rapp and Kevin Spacey. Everybody knows Kevin Spacey. He's been in trouble for a couple years since he was canceled off the set of House of Cards. And so here's Anthony Rapp, and if I guarantee you know him in some way. Originally, he was a child actor, and he was in that movie Adventures in Babysitting. Remember that one with Elizabeth Shue? It's a fantastic 80s movie. Who didn't fall in love with her? I know I did, especially that opening sequence. Directed by Christopher Columbus, not the one that discovered America, but the director. Anyways, great movie. And then he went on to Broadway, was in Rent. Now he's on Star Trek Discovery. He's alleging that Kevin Spacey, in 1986, when Rapp was 14, Kevin Spacey was 26, and there was this party, and he says Kevin Spacey groped him in the bedroom. Anthony Rapp wants $40 million for emotional, psychological damage. This is civil court. Kevin Spacey, and that started this week, and Kevin Spacey's lawyer has been grilling Anthony Rapp and pretty brutally on the stand, and there's been a back and forth with that. But $40 million, that's a lot of money. Kevin Spacey, meanwhile, is facing charges of sexually assaulting 3 other men in London, with a trial likely next year. Jumping to the next trial of a Hollywood actor. This involves that 70s show actor Danny Masterson, who went on trial this week too. Now he's facing 3 charges of rape and looking at a possible prison sentence of 45 years to life. There's 3 women who alleged that he sexually assaulted them. They've wrapped this up into this trial. There's a little twist to this case. Danny Masterson, they're saying, is not the only thing on trial, but also the Church of Scientology, because Masterson and each of his victims were all in the Church of Scientology. And if you've looked into that, it's pretty nutty. I did an expose of Scientology when I was a reporter at Cleveland Scene back in the day, and went through their auditing process and just generally got creeped out by the whole thing. But there's going to be some details about Scientology probably coming up in this trial. You're going to want to watch that. His accusers, they're saying, were afraid to go to police originally because of fear of retaliation from the church. They'll label them as what's called suppressives, or suppressive entities or something like that, and once they identify you as being against the church, they ruin your life. One of these victims was told to use LRH's technology to solve her problems. This is according to an article in Variety, which is linked at the end of the podcast. LRH, of course, being L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology and the writer of probably the worst sci-fi saga of all time, Battlefield Earth. I'll fight you on that. Also on trial this week, Alex Jones. This trial wrapped up. It was another civil trial. A judge on Wednesday ordered Alex Jones of InfoWars to pay nearly $1 billion to the family of the child victims in the Sandy Hook massacre after he claimed on his show that the whole thing was a hoax. Remember Sandy Hook? I know there's been a lot of mass shootings in schools. This was one of the first big ones. Adam Lanza killed 20 kids in Sandy Hook, ages 6 and 7. He also killed 6 adults. His victims, this is going back to Alex Jones now, the families that are suing him are not likely to see much of that money. He doesn't have $1 billion. It's basically figurative. You know, it's going to bankrupt him and probably end InfoWars. So now I'm fine with going after Alex Jones. More power to you. But I'd like to see the gun companies pay more than this crazy guy on the internet. They only got $73 million. This is the families of the victims from Remington, which manufactured the gun used to kill the children. They only got $73 million from them earlier this year. Speaking of school shootings, a jury just yesterday, on Thursday, decided the fate of Nikolas Cruz, who killed 17 people at a high school in Parkland in 2018. He could have been put to death, but the jury spared his life, sentencing him to prison for the remainder of his days. Some people would find that worse justice, but the jury could have sent him to his death. Now, that likely would have involved like another 30 years of appeals, but eventually it would have happened. Some of them are upset. Now, the jury looked at mitigating circumstances to consider whether or not they should put him to death. And one of the things that helped was the history that this kid had before he killed all those people, the kids and adults. Of course, you'd think he wouldn't come from a good past. Well, his mother drank well. She was pregnant. There might have been some psychological damage there. He definitely, they say, was, had some psychiatric disorders and was also raped as a child, his lawyer said. So, it's pretty simple when you consider, just if I was in the jury, the thing that I would be thinking all the time here is sane people don't commit mass murder. Just the fact that they're doing that, I think, is a mitigating circumstance. But, there you have it. Let's go to, now some weirder stories. These are the bigger stories. Think of them as part 2 and 3. I want to tell you about this bizarre story written by Sheila Flynn and this week's on a story this week from The Independent. Sheila Flynn is a very good crime reporter for The Independent and other places. What is it about big cats? This is my question to you. What is it about big cats that make people crazy? You have to read the story, which I've linked at the end. It has details and tells the story of one Trisha Meyer, who is right now a fugitive, but expected to be arrested by next week. That's my prediction. She's still on the run in the United States after getting caught trafficking exotic animals. Think Tiger King, but like a millennial, and you've pretty much got it. So Trisha is a 40-year-old single mother. She tried to make it as a social media influencer with multiple Insta accounts, and she was also on OnlyFans. She often posted pictures of her semi-nude holding up an exotic cat. She also, I don't know if it's Botox or surgery or what, but she's got that whole like big lip, kind of look that definitely requires some surgery or some sort of thing going on. Anyways, check out the pictures online. She'd move around the states. This was her deal. She'd move around, I think, Texas and Arizona, a couple other states, and she would find somewhere cheap to live, or she'd end up squatting somewhere and promising to pay rent, but she wouldn't. And then the landlord would check in, and suddenly there's 100 dogs in her living room. And then she realized she'd make more money if she sold exotic cats instead of dogs, so leopards and cheetahs and things like that. And so she finally got caught after selling a jaguar, not the car, but the animal. She sold a jaguar to a guy in California for $30,000. Unfortunately, he couldn't care for the jaguar because you can't. And it ended up in a shelter, and the police started to investigate, traced it back to Trisha. They charged her last week with interstate transport of endangered species, and they went to arrest her, and nobody can find her. She's disappeared. I'm assuming along with her kid, although the newspaper reports don't say. So be on the lookout, the cops say, for a 41-year-old woman with blonde hair and 100 dogs. So she should be easy to find, I would think. Last top crime story this week out of Australia. This has to do with their spy agency, the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, or NAMBLA for short. Strange and sad case, this is. And there's calls for a suspected terrorist to get out of detention this week, according to this article in The Guardian. This involves 51-year-old Syed Abdellatif, held in detention for 10 years. He's been sitting in detention in Australia for 10 years, originally suspected to be a terrorist. In 2012, he came over to Australia by boat seeking asylum. He was running away from Egyptian officials, and Australian authorities then contacted Egyptian authorities and said, "Hey, what is this guy?" And they're like, "Oh, don't, give him back. He's a terrorist, and we're gonna put him to death." And they're like, "Okay, let's see some evidence." And so they sent him all this evidence, but turns out it was all testimony that came from another man that they caught and then tortured. This guy was just making stuff up because that's what you do when you're being tortured. You'll say anything to your captor. So he pointed the finger at this guy under torture. Of course, they can't use any of that. They want to throw it all out, but they don't know what to do with this guy. So no trial, nothing has been happening for 10 years, and this guy's just been chilling in prison in Australia. And there's a rallying cry down there to let him out, at least on some sides. So that's the case. And what's going on this week is his lawyers are arguing. There's an appeal to let him out, finally get out after not being charged and not tried for 10 years. So that's the top news stories of this week. I've got lots more. There's an update in the Leah Croucher case you're going to want to hear, and some fantastic genealogy news. Weird story out of Ohio, my backyard here. Not literally my backyard. There's nothing there but a bird feeder. So I will be back in 2 and 2 with more true crime this week. And we're back with One Day at a Time, starring Valerie Burton Ernie. All right, here we go. Cold case updates. Right off the bat, Leah Croucher. Have you heard about this case out of the UK? You probably have if you've been listening to a lot of true crime podcasts. Big case over there. Police on Wednesday announced that they had discovered human remains and items belonging to the missing teenager Leah Crouch in a home not far from where she disappeared in 2019. This according to MK Citizen. This is not a very popular case here in the United States, but like I said, very big in the UK. This dates back to February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, 2019, when 19-year-old Leah Croucher left her home at 8 a.m. She was walking to work. It's about 2 miles away. She worked for a credit collection company. This took place in Buckinghamshire, England. That's outside of London. London's a little to the southeast. Now, her phone stopped working at about 8:34 a.m. that morning. She leaves home at 8. Phone stops working at 8:34. Not seen since. And since then, the police have poured tons of hours into this case. They knocked on 4,000 doors, scoured lakes. Now, just this week, they got a tip. At the beginning of this week, they get a tip. And that led them to a home not far from where she lived that was under renovation. And what I think happened is whoever was renovating that found the remains and the items belonging to this girl and immediately called the police. We don't know that for sure yet. That's a little speculation. Police said, though, that they found human remains. They have not definitively ID'd them as Leah Croucher, although they found her things too. The former residents the former resident of this building, was a convicted pedophile. Now, another sad part of this story is Leah's brother Hayden got in some trouble a couple months after she disappeared when he threatened her ex-boyfriend, possibly related to this case. I know somebody near me went missing, I'd be going anywhere for information, and certainly would be looking at the ex-boyfriend. He got in some trouble over that. There was a restraining order, and then a couple months later, he died by suicide. So hopefully there'll be justice in that case soon. Next case, cold case I want to tell you about that was adjudicated this week. In 1978, that's the year I was born. I am 44 years old. I'm just as old as this case. 19-year-old Linda Shari was stabbed to death in her home in Buffalo, New York. And this week, a jury convicted John Sauberin of her murder. This is according to BuffaloNews.com. Sauberin would have been 19 years old at the time, by the way. He now faces 25 years to life in prison. Police found blood samples in her home, in Shari's home, that linked to Sauberin. His DNA, this was not quite genetic genealogy. His DNA was already in a database. It seems like he got in some trouble, and they took his DNA at some point, had him in a police database, and eventually it hit in 2019. Now, what's interesting about this case is Sauberin's lawyers they tried to argue against this DNA link in interesting ways. They pointed to pictures from the crime scene that showed the police using fingerprint brushes, and they sent a police radio down near, I think, some of the blood samples. And their argument, I believe, was that they had been at another crime scene that Sauberin may have been at, and then that DNA transferred from there and then into Shari's room, and that's why his DNA showed up at that crime scene. So kind of a convoluted story, but one of these days a jury's going to buy that, and it'll be the first loss in these DNA cases, and that could be a big deal. Genetic genealogy news, you know how I love those pieces of knowledge. Genetic genealogy is, as we look at this, it's giving us the endings of all these stories that were mysteries before, all these unresolved stories, and we're finally getting the final acts, the denouement, if you will. And that's what genetic genealogy does. It's pretty cool. Because who are we after all? I'm getting a little woo-woo here, but what are we in the end? We're our name and our legacy. And there are all these John and Jane Does out there that don't have a name. They don't have their story wrapped up in a bow. So this involves a 1994 case where the remains of an unknown woman were found under a bridge in Hancock County, Indiana. The police could not ID her. They figured she was between ages 30 and 50. She had short brown hair, was about 5 foot 4 inches tall. Now there's hundreds of cases like this, and very little time to address them, and 28 years went by in a flash. Last week, police retested the remains, last year they retested the remains and were able to extract some DNA. That went to our friends over at Othram Labs, who came back with a possible match through genetic genealogy. It's believed this woman was Doreen Tiedemann, who's a 34-year-old woman who went missing in 1994. She was from Cleveland, too. And unfortunately, she was not reported missing until 1996. She had a history of hitchhiking and I think going out on these adventures. They've since confirmed the DNA with family, and police suspect foul play. In another case from 1994, another cold case, no, this is much older, because what they did, they're like, you solved one from 1994, how about a case from 1974? And Othram's like, all right, hold my beer. So according to Shaw Local News Network, 3 hunters found a man's body in a rural creek in Will County, Illinois, on November 9th, 1974. Nobody knew who this guy was for nearly 50 years. Othram used family tree DNA and traced the genealogy to a nephew in Illinois. They called him up. They said, yeah, I got an uncle. He disappeared back then. His name was Donald Rosick. Cause of death undetermined. But how cool is that? I can't even keep up with all these cases. I think. I hope you're as excited as I am. I got some weird news for you. I like a little weird crime once a week, and this one, who are the victims? This is a good case to talk about. All right, first of all, you got to know we love fishing here in Ohio, and the catch supreme, the one that everybody's after, are the walleyes in Lake Erie. Them's are good eatins, as my grandpa would say. And I don't know if you saw this breaking on the news a week or two ago, but there was a big cheating scandal at this year's Lake Erie Walleye Trail Tournament up on Lake Erie. There's a cheating scandal, and you can see the video online where this judge noticed that one team's batch of walleyes seemed to weigh a lot more than walleyes should weigh. And on a hunch, opened up one of the fish and all these weights came out. They were weighting down the fishes. They were stuffing weights down their throat and into their skin. And they got caught. So there were these two guys behind it, Jacob Runyon and Chase Kaminsky. And they've now been charged with several felonies. Because if they had not been caught, they would have claimed the top prize, which was $28,760, which makes it attempted grand theft. And they face a year in prison for each felony. So tough going there. Why? Why would you? I mean, obviously it's $28,000, but there are better ways to. I don't know if there are easier ways. I'm not saying I'm going to do this, but I don't know, something to think about. So I don't worry. I'm not going to. I can't put the worm on the hook. Pop culture news. There's a new series, another new crime series by Ryan Murphy. This is the guy behind the Dahmer series that everybody's going. And Dahmer, by the way, I thought everybody was going to be tired of this stuff, but Dahmer is the second most popular series in Netflix history now. So all you people like putting your noses up at Dahmer, I know you're watching it. I'm not going to watch it. You're watching it. I'm not going to do it. Ryan Murphy's got another new series on Netflix. Starts streaming today, called The Watcher. And this is super creepy. It's based on the true story of the Brodus family, who bought a $1.35 million house in Westfield, New Jersey in 2014. This is according to an article that appeared in The Cut, which I've linked. And they moved. So this family moves into this beautiful house, Westfield, New Jersey, and shortly thereafter, they received the first of several threatening letters in the mail. And here's how the first one reads, quote, now imagine you get this letter in the mail. Quote, how did you end up here? I'm not going to read the address, Boulevard call to you with its force within? The home has been the subject of my family for decades now, and it approaches its 110th birthday. I've been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s. My father watched in the 1960s, and it's now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls? Why are you here? I will find out. Yikes. Get some cameras. Get some ADT down there. These letters continued, and sometimes it would mention personal details like the kids' nicknames. So they've always suspected it was a neighbor that didn't like them moving in. So I'll probably watch that one. Ryan Murphy, you got me. I'm not going to watch Dahmer, though. I'm not going to do it. I've heard people have told me it's very good. I'm not going to do it. I'll probably do it. Finally, usually at this point in the episode, we check the charts on Chartable. I think I'm going to stop doing that for a couple reasons. It's not very important, and all I end up doing is showcasing the other top shows in the small limited true crime industry that it was. So I'm just going to throw something out at you that I really like every week. It could be a book, it could be a movie, it could be a podcast, but these are my recommendations. And some of you have noticed that I keep true crime books on the bookshelves, and I usually switch this one out every week, and I'll continue to do so. But that'll be my pick of the week, you know. And this week is one of my favorite true crime books from the last couple years. It's called Couple Found Slain. Now, it's a different kind of true crime book in a good way. It's written by Makita Brotman, who, if you don't know her stuff, seek her out. She's one of the best voices in true crime these days. This book details the Brian Bechtold double homicide case. Brian Bechtold walked into a police station in February 1992 and confessed to murdering his parents in Silver Spring, Maryland. Said he was possessed by the devil. That is not quite what the book is about. The book is about what happens to Brian in the years after the murder, after he confesses. And the story is very compelling. It's what happens when you're found insane and you go to prison for a horrible crime like that, and then you get sane in the institution. You come out of that schizophrenia, you get the treatment you need, and suddenly you have the remorse for what you did. What happens then? What happens when you do horrible things when you're technically insane and then you get sane? That's what the book's about. It's fabulous. So check it out. That's my recommendation for this week, and we've done it. We've survived another week. That's always reason to celebrate. In the words of the incomparable Murray Saul, the godfather of Cleveland radio, it's time we gotta get down, damn it. True Crime This Week is a Fearful Symmetry production. Photo and artwork are licensed through Shutterstock. If you like the cut of my jib, I have another podcast you might enjoy called The Philosophy of Crime, in which I attempt to solve the big questions behind our true crime obsession by looking to philosophy for answers. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Sit, Brownie, sit. Good dog.